On this episode of the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, I talk with Tom Kemp. Tom, in addition to being an author, a speaker, and someone who has very deep knowledge in technology in Silicon Valley, he was also the co-author of the Delete Act. So the Delete Act in the state of California was just passed as a law. So it was signed into law on October the 11th, 2023 by the California Governor Gavin Newsom. So in this episode, we talk quite a bit about the Delete Act, among other things. Congratulations to Tom. And this is a great exploration of that act for those of you who don't know much about it. Thank you. Personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a very special guest on the show, Tom Kemp. He is a Silicon Valley-based entrepreneur, seed angel investor, policy advisor, and author. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, those are a lot of words, right? About all the stuff that you do, but I feel like it doesn't truly encompass everything that you do. You're obviously very deep into tech. You're a Silicon Valley person. You know a lot about what's happening in Silicon Valley or has been over the years. You have a deep interest in stuff like privacy, AI, emerging tech. That's my space. And you and I know each other from LinkedIn. I also had the pleasure of providing a quote for your book because I think it's amazing. So thank you for letting me read it. And I think the public agrees. I think it's still on several bestseller lists, if I'm not mistaken. So I think you're definitely filling a void that's there in terms of being able to pull all the different ideas together in terms of technology, privacy, and then just what is happening with Silicon Valley. So why don't you tell me a bit about how did you get here? How did you get here? And why does this area, especially around privacy, interest you?
Yeah. So as you said, I'm a Silicon Valley-based entrepreneur, investor, policy advisor, and most recently an author of this book called Containing Big Tech. And most recently, I was the CEO and founder of a cybersecurity company called Centrify that I grew with a great team to over 100 million in sales. We had 2,000 customers, more than half the Fortune 50. So I definitely got a great appreciation for large amounts of data being collected and then being hacked, right? And after my company was acquired, I said, I've been focusing on data from a cybersecurity perspective, but let's talk about and look at it more from a governance perspective. And so I really started digging into privacy. Now, my company, Centrify, we had to be GDPR compliant, and I was very familiar with a lot of the rules and laws that are out there, but really dug in. And then I got involved in this political campaign in 2020 for Proposition 24 here in California, where I live, which is the California Privacy Rights Act. And then that led me to advising other people and campaigns and groups and getting involved in legislation. And so what I've done is I've kind of taken all this knowledge that I have as an entrepreneur, as a policy advisor, and put it together in this book called Containing Big Tech. And so, so I just, it's exciting space. I know your listeners, privacy is top of mind, right? Because it involves data associated with us. And then when you look at the AI revolution that's happening, there's great concern about personal data being fed into AI. So it's incredibly topical, very exciting space. And I think it's great to really spend time like you do on your podcast, looking at this, thinking about it, looking at laws, looking at ethics, the whole nine yards.
That's fascinating. I love to see people who bring so many different experiences and perspectives, because that's what I think we need in order to solve these problems. Something unique to me in terms of the US, and this is a confusion a lot of times around cybersecurity and privacy. So a lot of times I hear people talk about cybersecurity and they start sprinkling in privacy stuff, and it just is not the same. Even though they have a symbiotic relationship, they're not the same. So tell me your thoughts about how you explain to people the difference between cybersecurity and privacy.
Yeah, I mean, cybersecurity is about the protection of information or code or other objects, from a digital perspective as well. So it's about securing and protecting. Privacy is about governance of, and it's more limited towards personal data. So it doesn't involve copyright material, intellectual property, source code. Those are very valuable things that can be stolen from a cybersecurity perspective. Privacy is more narrowly focused on personal data, and depending on what part of the world and what laws, it will have different definitions. And it's more like the governance of that in terms of what rights are associated with consumers, what obligations that you have, what enforcement bodies that may oversee. So it's kind of a Venn diagram. It overlaps in terms of the personal data, securing it versus governing it from a privacy perspective, but also the core definition of privacy, at least in the United States, historically has been Justice Brandeis, which is the right to be left alone, as opposed to cybersecurity is probably the right not to be hacked, right?
Right.
So it's fundamentally different.
Yeah, I agree with that. I love that you brought up Brandeis. That's a great reference there. I think California is the epicenter of what's happening in privacy in the US, and people all over the world are very interested in California. So, California has always been very progressive in privacy over the years. And I feel like maybe some states are a bit jealous, perhaps envious where California is, but California has been doing this work for decades in terms of building that foundation in order to get where you are in terms of the CPRA and the CCPA and things like that. As a Californian, looking at what's happening in other states, knowing that California is very influential, you've been involved with campaigns and policy and advisory for things like the CPRA and also this new bill that you helped co-author, the Delete Act. I'd love to get your thoughts about what is happening in California and how are you seeing it impact other states or other companies even?
Yeah. So California has always led the nation in terms of consumer protection. And, you can go back to automobiles, right? And California, especially, for example, with emissions, has historically set the standard in the United States. So California has been on the forefront of consumer protection. Specific to privacy, that California voters in 1972, were very far-sighted and actually put the word privacy in the Constitution by a ballot initiative. So in California, privacy is actually an inalienable right. That's not, as we all know, that's not in the US Constitution itself, right there. And so what's happening in California was that in 2018, there was going to be a ballot initiative called the California Consumer Privacy Act that was led by a gentleman by the name of Alistair McTaggart. And there was a lot of opposition from the tech community. And then what happened was Cambridge Analytica, and then they all kind of slunk away with their tails between their leg, the opposition. And then the legislature said, we're going to look really stupid that something like this is on the ballot, and this is going to look really bad if this becomes something that the voters have to vote for and we can't deliver. And so there is a law in California that within 30 days of a ballot initiative, which is also very unique to California, this direct democracy thing, which goes back to the progressive area with Hiram Johnson. And so it's kind of in the same time that Louis Brandeis was around, the whole progressive era right there, that within 30 days, the legislature can basically say, oh, we can take a ballot initiative and we can turn it into law so it doesn't have to show up in November. And so that's how it got passed in 2018. What happened then is the tech industry came back and started watering it down in 2019. And then the guy, Alistair McTaggart, said, nuts to this. And so he came out with the ballot initiative in 2020 called the California Privacy Rights Act that amends the CCPA. And what it does is it actually sets a floor versus a ceiling, which means that new laws that are done in the legislature cannot water it down. And then it added an enforcement agency, et cetera. So goal was to try to make California on par with GDPR for the most part as well. So that's what we have right now. And then, I'm more than happy to talk about how that has impacted the other states. Do you want me to or you want to ask a question, or I'm kind of monologuing right now.
No, no, it's perfect. Yeah, I would love to know your thoughts about how it's impacting other states.
Please, let's hear what you think.
Wow. Well, first of all, I feel like California has always played this role as being a forerunner in these, like you said, consumer protection. And have seen over decades or over time, other states try to put those things in their laws. But I think one of the more interesting things that I noticed, especially when CCPA first got on the books, is that companies that did not have to comply with CCPA decided that they would do it anyway because they felt like instead of carving out California, let's just treat everybody the same, right? So not all companies do this, but that is something that I've seen that I did not expect would happen on the business front. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a good business decision because if you match to the gold standard in the United States, then it's very likely if there's other state laws that come into play that as long as you meet the California standards, then it'll be less amount of work to deal with any other states. And so right now, we're actually up to 12 states. So first it was California in 2018 and then 2020. Then the end of last year, there were 5 states. And then I think we're now up to 12. I know Texas and there was Oregon out there. And now it turns out that there are some differences though. And so one thing is that the tech industry woke up and said, "Oh my gosh, yes, there's this thing called the California effect, much like there's the Brussels effect with GDPR and other things." And so the tech industry started actually writing a lot of the laws like in Virginia. And so there are weaker sauce laws, but there are ones that are stronger, like Connecticut, for example, that maybe more closely aligns with California as well. And so that's where we're at right now. We do have a hybrid system in place. And between California and Texas having privacy laws, we're talking about what, a third of the nation now finally having at least some privacy law. The big difference is probably with the weaker laws versus the stronger ones has to do with the universal opt-out capabilities, the global privacy control. And that's like one great example. And also in the areas of enforcement, California is still the only state that actually has what they call in Europe a supervisory authority. We have the California Privacy Protection Agency, and the enforcement just started. The enforcement of the regulations has been kicked out, but the PPA can still enforce the regulations associated with CCPA and the core law itself. There seemed to be a lot of confusion out there when people read that, oh, we don't have to do anything with CPRA. No, you do have to do something with the core statute, maybe the finer points of the regulations, et cetera. So look, obviously all the fact that we have 12 states is leading to probably a further debate whether or not we need a federal privacy law. And then the core issues there are private right of action and preemptions. But the states are just plowing ahead and in lieu of the federal government doing something.
Yeah. California was the first state to have data breach notification laws. And as I saw that, other states started to pick up until 2019, where all states had them, right? But they're all different.
Yeah, it took 15 years though. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It took like 15 years or so to finally have that happen. But yes, you're right. And so we now have a patchwork in the data breach notification side.
Exactly. And I was saying in 2019, I'm like, if we don't have a federal law, then we're going to do the same pattern again. And that's exactly what's happening, where the states are passed. California's first passes comprehensive law, then other states are doing it. You touched on quite a few things I want to dig deep into. And one is, I kind of joke that in the US now, we're going to have privacy laws almost like barbecue capitals of the world. So like Carolina barbecue versus Kansas City barbecue. So we're going to have California type privacy laws versus Virginia privacy laws. So they seem to be falling in those two camps. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there are ones that are better and stronger and provide more consumer protection, and there are ones that are kind of weaker barbecue sauce, to use that analogy right there. And I think at the end of the day, I'm very supportive of a federal privacy law, but here's the big but. The issue is that the federal government has historically been very slow moving and putting together privacy laws. And so like the last major kind of privacy related laws was in the 90s with HIPAA, Graham Leach Bliley. That was pre iPhone, pre Facebook, pre everything, right? And so it's not like if they do come up with one that they can kind of keep up with changes in technology as well. So I fundamentally believe that the if we do a federal privacy law, it should represent a floor. And frankly, that floor should be high enough that maybe 48, 49 states will be below that floor and it will raise up their privacy law. But I do think, especially in the area of AI, there should be innovation. And we talked about Brandeis. Brandeis not only said that privacy is the right to be left alone, he also said that the states are laboratories of democracy, right? And with like HIPAA, states can go over and beyond. In California, we have CMIA, right? And there's other examples of that as well. So I actually believe that states should have the flexibility to potentially preempt federal privacy law, but the bar should be so high that in reality it may be kind of one or two states doing a little bit more, et cetera. But at least we should have that flexibility because unfortunately the federal government moves so slowly, and especially when you put AI into the mix. I mean, people are complaining about copyright material being sucked up by AI, but what about our faces? Our genetics, right? That's going to be sucked up into AI as well. And so we do need a federal privacy law. But barring that, let's keep on going down the state path until they finally wake up and do something.
Yeah. I want to toss out a radical idea for you. I'm sure people pull their hair out when they hear this. I think that we should have a federal privacy law that, if nothing else, all it does is harmonize the language and the definitions of like what personal data is, different things like that. And they forget private right of action and they forget preemption.
Hey, I'm actually that would be good. That's a great idea. I mean, that just kind of like here are the core set of rights that people have, right? It's just like anti-discrimination laws, right? Just like boom, this is what it is. This is what it means to discriminate. In this case, this is what personal data means, right? And I think that again, that would cover the vast majority, and with the states that don't even have it something defined right there. I also agree that we should have kind of a baseline data breach notification law, which says the same type of personal data. This is what it means to have it be breached. And yeah, there will be one or two states that say, oh well, it's our specialized ID card for XYZ that should be included as part of the breach notification. Yeah, let them do that. But in the end, when you do set a high floor, that the vast majority of states will be upgraded to that, and there will only be a smattering. And we see that with HIPAA. I mean, all the other privacy related laws are not ceilings, they're floors, and we should do the same thing here.
Yeah, there are a lot of misconceptions. So I hear people talk about we need preemption because of law, like HIPAA preempts. I'm like, HIPAA preempts because it was first, not because it tried to cut off other laws, right? So I think if you're first, if you have the law that comes out first, then of course, no one has to, just like you were saying, if you create a law where the floor is high enough, then other states may not even need to pass laws, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So let's talk a little bit about your book. So your book is Containing Big Tech, How to Protect Our Civil Rights, Economy, and Democracy. I think this is an interesting title because I feel like a lot of tech folks like us, we go off on the whole tech tangent and don't really tie back these concepts to society in a way, right? So how is technology or how is the way data is managed impacting not only individuals, but us as a society as a whole? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, look, I mean, it's funny because you and I are kind of in the weeds sometimes, when we're like, what is this definition of sensitive personal information? And we're dealing with like, well, what's the definition of precise geolocation? Is that an acre? Is that, square miles and all that stuff? And we're cognizant of all these laws, and we're thinking, well, that's more cybersecurity versus privacy. And the problem is that this is such a big deal for the average person. It's like protecting their data, making sure that they have basic rights, that I kind of stepped back and I said to myself, we should have a book, not a super geeky book or a book, that only is for academics, et cetera. What I wanted to do is take a comprehensive look at the issues concerning the largest tech providers that you could hand your Uncle Larry or an average politician or someone that just cares about just issues, and hand it to them. And so they can say, aha, I get what it means for AI bias, right? I understand what digital surveillance is and the online behavioral advertising business model. And then, but not only did I want to say, here are the issues that are directly impacting our democracy, our civil rights, our economy, et cetera, but I also wanted to provide solutions. Like I wanted to tell people, here's how you can limit your data footprint. So I talk about third-party trackers. I talk about mobile SDKs. You and I both have written about the metapixel, right? People don't realize that if they fill out a shopping cart, right, that information is being shuffled off into meta land, right? And so I wanted to have people be aware that, yeah, you could actually set up EFF's privacy badger to block third-party cookies, right? And then also there's just so much stuff happening nowadays. There's AI, there's TikTok, et cetera. And a lot of average people don't know what AI is. They think AI is purely just generative AI, right? But AI has a lot of very positive uses, but it could be used for a bias exploit. They know their kids are using TikTok, but they don't know what TikTok is and how TikTok gathers microsignals to optimize. They don't know kind of how that. So, and of course, there's just new laws, right, that have come into this world. And so, what I wanted to do with the book is be able to kind of give a fresh and updated look on AI, on new companies, et cetera. And actually, I feel really good that I spent so much time last year really looking at what big tech was doing with AI. And then when I published the book, then all this stuff came out. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad that I kind of was tracking that beforehand, because it's a very fresh look at what's happening with technology.
So, what's happening now in the world that's concerning you most related to privacy? So, something you see and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't really like that.
Well, look, historically, the business models of the largest tech providers, and probably Apple's the exception, and to a lesser extent, Microsoft and Amazon, but definitely the core of Google and Meta, historically, their business models were, hey, I'm going to create these free services, which are really walled gardens because they don't provide interoperability with other solutions out there. And they did that purposely. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have people come into this walled garden, and through network effects, it's going to become more valuable. And I'm just going to collect as much information about these people as possible, and then use that information to serve highly personalized ads. And we all accepted that. We were like, boy, this was kind of creepy that I was looking for red shoes. And then for the next month, every website I ever visited has that red shoe floating right there, right? And we thought that was creepy, but we accepted that. That was the trade-off. But the problem is, over the last few years, is that people have figured out ways to weaponize that information. Okay. And here's a great example. It's so cool that as an advertiser, you can say, I want to target young single women with young children and serve them ads about my very economically priced diapers, right? That's great job of personalization. But wait a minute, you can use that same mechanism to say, for my rental, I want to exclude a young woman, a young single woman with children from seeing the rental ads, right? And so you can actually kind of flip it on its head. Or, and not wishing to get political here, but we are now in a post abortion rights America, and where the data of what people search for specific healthcare related topics can actually be used against them in multiple states right now. And we're starting to see examples of that, where attorney generals are saying, if someone goes out of state and seeks reproductive health care, I'm going to track them down. I'm going to find that. I'm going to arrest them. How are they going to do that? They're going to look at their Google searches, their maps, data, et cetera. So we're kind of in this weird situation that things that were legal before are now illegal, but all the data is still being collected about us as well. So my biggest concern is the weaponization of data. And then my secondary concern is that artists, musicians are freaking out about their content, their intellectual property being sucked up by AI. But we're already starting to see deep fakes of our faces and our personal data starting to be mashed up into the AI blender. And so pretty soon there'll be ads of half my face of and my voice talking, but it's not 100% me. And so our personal data is our intellectual property, and we should have protection over that. And so it kind of goes back that to make sure that we can govern AI, we first have to go back to the whole governance of the data, right? And that's why I'm so focused that we really need to have more privacy rights because it's only going to get worse with AI.
I agree. I agree. Right. AI just exponentially raises the risk for humans. So I think that's definitely an issue. One thing that concerns me, and I want your thoughts, I feel as though there's a digital caste system being created where people who have data and have information have more opportunities to manipulate data. So I think it's not just the haves and the have-nots, but the knows and know-nots. What are your thoughts?
You know this better than I do, but we need laws not only to give people privacy rights in terms the right to know what's being collected, the right to say no to the collection and selling, the right to correct, the right to delete. But we also need to have businesses have purpose limitation and data minimization as well. And the big tech companies, like for example, Meta, formerly Facebook, they were collecting people's phone numbers and saying this is for multi-factor authentication, right? But then they turned around and started actually texting people and providing the phone numbers to their advertisers, right? And that was a violation of the FTC decree that they had, and that was one of the things that they were fined. But that's an example. If I give you my location data so I can be picked up by a ride sharing service, that doesn't mean that because I want to be picked up at XYZ point, that my location data can then be used to completely track me everywhere else or to know that I actually was at a cancer clinic. Because you're right, because that kind of data could actually be used against people, that this person is at a cancer clinic, right? Or this person is at a church or a mosque, etc. So we do have issues here. And so we do need the guardrails right there. And I don't think this is asking too much, which is if I give you my phone number for MFA, I don't want you just spamming me text and selling my phone number. I mean, that's just like basics, right? And that's what a privacy law should have in place.
Very good. I agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about the Delete Act. So, the Delete Act was an act that you co authored. I find that a lot of people, a lot of my clients in Europe, they don't really understand the difference between how deletion happens in the US versus Europe. So, some people confuse deletion with like a right to be forgotten, which it isn't. So, tell me about your work on this act and why it's important and what is it?
Sure. So this is California Senate Bill 362. As we recorded, it hasn't passed. It's still open legislation. Hopefully it'll pass the legislature and go to the governor. So probably when this airs, it'll been decided if it's a yay or nay, et cetera. But at the core of it is it involves entities known as data brokers, right? And so the companies that we directly interact with, that we have a direct relationship, like Walgreens, Walmart, Meta, Google, your hospital, et cetera, that's kind of first party data, right? And I consent to the use of my personal data for the business purposes signed up for. But in the US, unlike mainly in Europe, that we also have this concept of third party data where there's these entities known as data brokers that we don't have a direct relationship with, that we don't consent to the collection of our information, are collecting our information via mobile SDKs, third party trackers, credit card information, public information that they gather from property records, and they're building dossiers on us. And the issue that we have is that data is increasingly being weaponized, and there's horrific stories of data brokers selling data about people visiting abortion clinics or people that have a Muslim prayer app or tracking people into gay bars and outing them, et cetera. So there's just been a lot of bad headlines about just this unfettered collection and selling of our sensitive data, especially in the healthcare area. But the bigger issue is that because we don't know who these data brokers are, we can't tell them, please delete my information, right? So that's the first problem. Like if you don't have a relationship with them, you don't know that they're collecting and selling your data. The second problem is that each of the data brokers have a different way, if you do contact them, to try to get them to delete your information. And then pretty soon after you do aardvark data broker, it's just incredibly painful to get through the whole list, even if you had a list of data brokers. And then the other issue is that your deletion request is a one-time deletion request. And most of these data brokers sell data amongst each other. So if they know that, hey, Debbie's data was deleted, they call up their buddy data broker and said, send me back Debbie's information. And so the consumer has to go back and do a repeat right there. So it's just a complete, basically impossible for a consumer to get their data deleted from data brokers. And so what the California Delete Act, SB 362, does, it creates a consumer portal, kind of like the FTC's Do Not Call registry, where you have to be verified so this won't allow any fraud. You go in there and then you say, here's Tom Kemp, here's my email, here's my address. You hit the go button, and then the data brokers have to look at that information, periodically have to look at the registry, and then they have to delete the information. Now, there are exemptions, if the data brokers have your data for HIPAA reasons, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, et cetera. So there's the normal data exemptions that we have with the CPRA. But otherwise, this is a big win for consumers because they can finally hit the delete button right there. And it was fully motivated by the weaponization of data happening by data brokers and the fact that it's nearly impossible to get your data deleted from data brokers, assuming if you even know who they are.
Right. And I feel like this is, as jurisdictions are writing laws, the data brokers have kind of skirted around these issues because a lot of the way the laws are written are as if I know the person, the company that has my data, and then I'm holding them accountable in some way. Where if you don't know the company, how can you hold them accountable, right? So I like the fact that this is sort of flipping things on its head. So it's not putting the burden on me to know the company knows me, right? And I'm saying, hey, take my data and delete it, right?
Absolutely. And by the way, this is not original. I mean, I'm fully a supporter. I'm fully active helping. But obviously, at the end of the day, it's State Senator Josh Becker. He gets all the credit. He's the one that put this forth. I'm not a legislator, right? It's his team. And then there's a broad coalition of 30 groups working on this and all the major privacy groups. And I'll also say it's not an original idea. I mean, we've had the FTC's Do Not Call registry for telemarketers. Tim Cook actually proposed this in 2019. He said, hey, we need a data broker clearinghouse where consumers can delete. And at the federal level, Senator Ossoff and Cassidy made this proposal 2 years ago. It's called the Federal Delete Act. And even in the ADPPA that passed 53-2, the House Energy and Commerce Committee last year, Section 206 explicitly was about these third-party entities. And so this has been tried and true. This is well known. It's not an original idea. It's been kicked around with the Delete Act, with ADPPA, with the FTC Do Not Call registry, et cetera. And so hopefully California will be really the first ones to be able to give the consumers the ability to provide the deletion capabilities that are really lacking.
Very good. I'm very impressed by all your work, and it makes sense. Like, so the Do Not Call registry is very successful. So why not take advantage of that win and do the same thing? I want you to travel with me on the philosophical plane.
Uh-oh.
I want to propose something to you and just want your thoughts about it.
Please.
I think it would be interesting if privacy regulations would weave in a requirement for data accuracy. And the reason why I think that would be interesting is because in order for data to be accurate, that brings in the consumer, right? There has to be some type of verification with them, and then that forces transparency from the company that has data. What are your thoughts?
Well, I actually philosophically believe that privacy should be made easy for the consumer. And I wrote an article on Tech Policy Press where I walk through how difficult privacy is, right? If you make privacy easy, like Apple did with app tracking transparency, where you can just simply click a button and say, I don't want third-party trackers, 96% of consumers actually utilize it as well. And so I think that one of the problems that we have policy people that we focus on, like, let's give all these rights, but you kind of forget what the consumer interface is to them as well. Similarly, as privacy practitioners, right, we also make it difficult, right, that we need to walk a mile in the shoes of the consumer and says, hey, the consumer has a concern. What's the best way to make a happy customer, right? As opposed to let's make it difficult for them and they get really, really ticked off. So I think fundamentally, we do need to make privacy easy. The second thing is that we do need to have a consistent ability to write to correct. And then the third thing is that we do need a way for consumers to see what information, I call it consumer facing portals. We do need to have a way for consumers to see exactly what information that they have about them. Because the problem is, Debbie, is that oftentimes people have wrong information. And because scoring occurs based on that wrong information, that people are denied services, they don't get rentals, they don't get jobs because there was some bad data at some point that said they defaulted on a loan or something like that. And that may not be true, right? And so I think the whole transparency issue is critical. And I think it's equally critical in an AI world. We should have transparency in an AI world to be able to ask, hey, was this human generated or computer generated? Or we get a bunch of text, we see some text, we should be able to go back and ask OpenAI, did you generate this text or not? Right. And so I think overall, we do need a move to greater transparency of data that's either about us or been generated from an AI perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for humoring me with that. Do you think the US will ever move towards having more of an opt-in approach as opposed to an opt-out approach for marketing?
No, I don't, because in California, when we came out with the California Consumer Privacy Act, there was a concern about a Supreme Court case, the Sorrell case. And so it basically kind of said to the whole opt in. So we're kind of forced into an opt out model. But what's the way that you could actually address that is you could address that from a consumer perspective by having the global privacy control, where you actually send an opt out signal, and that signal is associated with your browser or your device. And so as you visit a website, you're sending the signal, I don't want you to sell it. And so that actually works better as an opt-in system. I mean, Europe has an opt-in system, but we have cookie fatigue. Like people have to like, okay, that's making privacy equally difficult than the opt-out right here. And so I really think for first-party data, we need GPC, the global privacy control. And for third-party data, for data brokers, we need a data broker clearinghouse with the deletion aspect that, again, is not original idea. Tim Cook talked about it in 2019, and we've seen this with the Federal Delete Act proposal, and we see it now with SB 362 and the California Delete Act as well. So two simple things could fix the problem. The first of which is GPC and the universal opt-out signals. California and Colorado support it, but the weaker sauce ones that the tech industry has heavily influenced the privacy laws, they're not required. And that's incredibly disappointing. And I think people need to rethink about that and think about how consumers can take advantage of rights. Because if you can't easily exercise rights, then do you really have rights?
Right. So that goes to the core of the human versus consumer right approach that I talk about, where unfortunately, sometimes depending on what jurisdiction you're in, you can't exercise your right unless you're consuming something, right?
Yeah.
So not every human is a consumer. So that's like an issue. I'm glad you brought up global privacy control. I really definitely support it. I think a confusion with people is that they think global privacy control means it is global. It just means that the person that is doing it, they can configure their browser in a certain way that the companies that for the websites they go to, they are supposed to respect the signal without the person having to like to say no or opt out to each website, right?
Yes. And yeah, and actually, that's why there's this free plugin called Privacy Badger with EFF, and I have no relationship with EFF and et cetera, but it does two things. It provides the blocking of third-party cookies, and it also sends the global opt-out signal as well. So it's kind of a twofer. But yeah, I love the concept of GPC, and I know as you've written with the Sephora fine in California, that California, at least the Attorney General, and I assume that the California Privacy Protection Agency has sent a clear message to businesses that you do need to respect the global opt-out signal. And so I would advise any people that are privacy practitioners to make sure that you support it, number one. And number two, going back to the whole pixels and metapixel, et cetera, I think that you oftentimes the marketing departments kind of are off on their own and they think it's really cool to collect all this information. And I think the privacy people need to kind of sit down in an organization, spend a little time with the marketing people and ask the question, how are you using the pixel? Does this actually transmit sensitive data about the consumer? Because remember, the metapixel captures information about anyone, even if they're not actually a customer of the actual company. If I just randomly go to a website and then put in my personal information, it transmits it to Facebook, even if I'm actually not registered on that system as well. So I do think that those are the third-party pixels and GPC should be top of mind with privacy practitioners to make sure that your business is not going to be exposed to what happened with Sephora.
Right. And I'm advising my clients, regardless of where their customers are, that they need to really make sure that their websites are configured to do that handshake,
Yep.
the GPC signal. So, I'm seeing a lot of companies, they're probably not paying too much attention to it right now, which they should,
Yeah.
especially as we see more enforcement start to happen in California and other states that respect this thing. But I think from a company perspective, I think this is going to be almost like I think global privacy control will have like a huge impact on businesses that really understand. People who read the Sephora case and were surprised that GPC showed up on the list of stuff that they should do. I think that hopefully those companies will move in that direction so then they don't have to be shamed and blamed once these things are fully enforced.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
So, if it was a world according to you, Tom, and we did everything that you said, what would be your wish for privacy anywhere in the world, whether it be through regulation, human behavior, technology? What are your thoughts?
Well, as I talk about in my book, Containing Big Tech, my goal is just simply to, first and foremost, just have people be more conscious that you are emanating digital exhaust and that you should have rights over that. And then you should be careful because sometimes that data can be used against you. And then in a perfect world, privacy would be easy, right? That we would have the right to say no and to people collecting and selling our data, and we should have the right to know as well. And so look, I'm not trying to propose aircraft safety where there's never a crash of an airplane or very rare and having, 100 check, like 100 checks you have to go to even before you turn on the engine of an airplane. My goal and vision is more car safety, right? That we shouldn't allow people to have, we should tell people, yeah, you shouldn't put the baby in your front lap when you're driving, that you should actually require to have a child car seat, that there should be airbags, et cetera. And that's kind of my goal and vision. And but people may say, well, but that stifles innovation. My goodness, look at the innovation that's happening in automobile manufacturing with electric cars and Teslas and all the great things that are happening, that now you have the Ford 150 charging up a house when the power has gone down. I mean, that's just, we never imagined that stuff. And so if we can get to kind of the equivalent of car safety vis-a-vis privacy, then does provide safety, and it also provides a means for innovation. So it's kind of striking that right balance. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to get to, which is, can we have a basic privacy law for the whole United States? Can we make it easy for us to delete data from entities that we don't have a relationship with, that purposely make it difficult via dark patterns for us to delete it? Like, dark patterns should be banned is just a great example as well. So that's kind of my vision, and I try to put forth this vision in the book, and I encourage people to check out Containing Big Tech.
I agree. I agree. I'm not saying it just because I'm quoted in the book. It is really good.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate you looking at it and saying some very nice things. It's greatly appreciated.
Yeah. You're filling that gap. There's definitely a gap there that you're filling, and it's really important. And I think we aren't going to solve privacy problems if we're just at conferences wearing like tweed jackets with leather patches on the elbows, right? So understanding that we need to be able to communicate this to someone who's 8 or 80 is very important.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was fun. I could talk to you for another hour.
Likewise, this has been great, and keep up the amazing work that you do and your evangelism. And I'm complimenting what you do with the book, with all the great content you put on LinkedIn and other social media, and of course your amazing podcast. So thank you again for having me on as a guest.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so sweet. Well, we have to find ways we can collaborate. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
All right. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.